The letter arrived on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after my grandfather passed away. I recognized the law firm name embossed on the heavy cream envelope. Inside was news that changed everything. I had inherited my grandfather's lake cabin in northern Minnesota. I had not visited the cabin in nearly 20 years, not since those golden childhood summers when Grandpa Jenkins taught me to fish and build campfires under star-filled skies. Life and distance had pulled me away, but the memories remained pristine in my mind. "The property has been in your family for generations," explained Mr. Hoffman, the family attorney, during our brief call. "Your grandfather was quite insistent that it pass directly to you. There are some papers you will need to sign when you arrive." I took a week off work and drove the 5 hours north, watching as urban sprawl gave way to rolling countryside, and eventually the dense pine forests that surrounded Lake Clearwater. The familiar gravel road appeared, winding through trees that seemed taller than I remembered. When the trees parted, there it stood. The cabin was smaller than in my memories, its dark wood exterior weathered by decades of Minnesota seasons. The wraparound porch sagged slightly on one side, and the green trim paint had peeled in places. But the large picture windows still faced the glittering lake, just as they always had. I stepped onto the creaking dock, inhaling the scent of pine and clean water. Memories flooded back. My grandfather standing tall at the end of this very dock, teaching me to cast a fishing line. The sound of his laughter echoing across the water. The quiet evenings when he would tell stories of how his own grandfather had purchased this land when nothing but wilderness surrounded the pristine lake. "Well, look who it is. A Jenkins returns to the lake." I turned to see an elderly man waving from the neighboring property. His face crinkled into a smile as he made his way over, hand extended. "Tom Wilson. Used to fish with your grandpa every Saturday for near 20 years. Sorry about his passing. He was one of the good ones." We shook hands and Tom studied my face. "You got his eyes, you know. Same way of looking at things straight on." "Thank you for saying that. I have not been back here in a long time." "Too long if you ask me. Your grandpa talked about you plenty though, proud as could be." Tom gazed out at the lake. This place meant everything to him. Refused to change a single board on that cabin unless absolutely necessary. Said some things ought to stay the way they were meant to be. We chatted a while longer. Tom told me how my grandfather had become something of a local legend for his stubbornness and principles. Other neighbors stopped by throughout the afternoon. The Abernathys from 2 doors down, old Mrs. Henderson who brought a casserole, and the Johnsons who had moved in just 5 years ago. As evening approached, I unlocked the cabin with the old brass key that had been included with the letter. Inside, everything remained exactly as I remembered. The stone fireplace dominated one wall. The handcrafted wooden furniture my great-grandfather had built still anchored the main room. A layer of dust covered everything, but beneath it was the cabin of my childhood. I spent hours exploring, opening drawers filled with fishing tackle, finding old photographs, and rediscovering books with my grandfather's notes in the margins. It felt like stepping into a time capsule, one that was now mine to preserve. As the sun began to set, I stepped back onto the porch with a cup of coffee, watching golden light dance across the lake surface. That was when I noticed the envelope taped to the front door. The official letterhead read, "Lakeside Community Association," and the content within made my peaceful homecoming evaporate. "Dear property owner," it began coldly. "This notice serves as a formal warning regarding multiple violations of community standards on your property." The letter continued with a list of alleged infractions: unauthorized dock modifications, non-compliant exterior maintenance. improper waste disposal, concluding with a demand for immediate correction and payment of $2,500 in fines and past due association fees. I stared at the paper in confusion. My grandfather had never mentioned any homeowners association. In all our summers here, there had never been talk of community standards or association fees. Something was very wrong, and the tranquility of my inheritance had just been shattered by an organization I had never heard of making demands on property that had been in my family for generations. The sharp knock on my door came at precisely 9:00 a.m. the following morning. I had been up since dawn, sorting through boxes of my grandfather's belongings, trying to find any mention of a lakeside community association. So far, I had found nothing. When I opened the door, I found myself face to face with a woman in her early 50s. Her blonde hair was styled in an immaculate bob, not a strand out of place despite the light breeze. She wore pressed khaki pants, a blue button-down shirt, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Good morning," she said, extending a manicured hand. "Corinne Peterson, president of the Lakeside Community Association. I see you have received our notice of violations." "Yes, I did," I replied, not taking her hand. "But there seems to be some confusion. My grandfather never mentioned being part of any association." Corinne's smile tightened. "Well, your grandfather was resistant to community standards. Now that the property has changed hands, we expect full compliance moving forward." She glanced past me into the cabin. "I am here for an inspection to document the full extent of the violations." "I do not recall inviting you inside," I said. Her smile vanished completely. Section 5, Paragraph 3 of the Association Bylaws grants the board right of inspection with 24-hour notice. The notice delivered yesterday serves as your notification. Before I could object further, Corinne pushed past me, clipboard in hand. For the next 30 minutes, she moved through my grandfather's cabin with the efficiency of someone accustomed to finding fault. She noted the non-regulation fireplace screen, the unauthorized bookcases built into the walls, and the non-compliant antique fishing gear displayed on the porch. "Your dock extends 3 feet beyond the permitted length," she stated, making another note. "And the boat slip modifications were never approved by the architectural committee." "This dock has been exactly the same since my great-grandfather built it in 1932, I countered. Corinne looked up from her clipboard. "The association standards were implemented for everyone's benefit. Your grandfather received special consideration due to his age, but that consideration does not extend to you. You have 14 days to bring everything into compliance." After she left, I walked down to the dock, staring out at the peaceful water that suddenly felt less welcoming. A neighbor, Mrs. Abernathy, approached cautiously from her property. "I saw Corinne Peterson here," she said, her voice lowered. "Be careful with that one. She has been president for 8 years, and in that time, 12 long-time residents have been forced to sell." "Forced to sell? How?" Mrs. Abernathy glanced around before continuing. "The fines keep coming. Hundreds, then thousands of dollars. When you cannot pay, they place liens on your property. Eventually, people give up." Over the next week, the pressure intensified. Each morning brought new violation notices, each more petty than the last. Improper window treatments, unauthorized vegetation, non-compliant mailbox placement. The fines now totaled over $5,000, along with a demand for back dues exceeding $12,000 for years of non-payment. I consulted the county offices, but the clerk seemed confused by my questions. "The Lakeside Community Association is a private entity," she explained. We do not oversee their operations. One evening, I attempted to take my grandfather's old fishing boat out on the lake, only to discover it had been completely blocked in its slip by association maintenance equipment. When I called the number on the violation notices to complain, Karen herself answered. "The association dock is for members in good standing only," she informed me coldly. "Until your violations are addressed and fees paid in full, your lake access privileges are suspended." "This is ridiculous," I protested. "You cannot block access to my own property." "Actually, Mr. Jenkins, the lakefront and dock are association property. Your property line ends 10 feet from the water. If you check the plat maps, you will see that clearly marked." That night, Tom Wilson came by with a warning. "They are playing hardball with you, just like they did with Howard Jameson last year. Poor man was 83, lived here his whole life. They hounded him with fines until his fixed income could not keep up. He sold to one of Karen's friends for half what the property was worth." "Why would they target specific properties?" I asked. Tom's expression darkened. "Notice which properties they go after, all lakefront, all with the best views, and they always seem to end up in the hands of people connected to Karen or the board." The final straw came in the form of a certified letter delivered the following Tuesday. It contained a formal eviction notice, giving me 30 days to vacate the premises due to ongoing and willful violation of association covenants. My grandfather's peaceful lakeside legacy was being stolen through bureaucratic bullying, but something about this situation did not add up. The association's claims about property lines contradicted family stories. It was time to find out exactly what my grandfather had left me, and why this HOA seemed so determined to force me out. The attic of the cabin was stifling in the late June heat. Dust particles danced in the beams of sunlight filtering through the small window as I pried open another box of my grandfather's papers. I had been searching for hours, hoping to find anything that might explain the property boundaries or mention of this mysterious homeowners association. Most of the boxes contained fishing records, old tax documents, and faded photographs of family gatherings at the lake. Nothing about property lines or association membership. But then, in a worn leather folder, I discovered something interesting: photographs of my grandfather standing next to boundary markers that seemed much further from the cabin than the property line Corinne had described. One black and white photograph from the 1960s showed my grandfather and his father standing proudly beside a large stone marker. Scrawled on the back was "Jenkins Property Boundary, North Shore." According to Corinne, our property ended just a few yards from the cabin, yet this marker appeared to be several hundred yards away, near what was now claimed as Association Common Area. The next morning, I drove to the county record's office in the small town 15 miles from the lake. The records clerk, an older woman named Doris, seemed surprised by my inquiry. "Jenkins property on Lake Clearwater. That is one of the original homesteads in the county," she said, leading me to a row of large bound volumes. "Your great-grandfather purchased that land in 1918. Let me see what we have on file." As Doris searched the records, another woman approached, having overheard our conversation. She introduced herself as Sarah Bennett, a local real estate attorney. "Did you say you are looking into the Jenkins property on Clearwater?" she asked, her interest clearly piqued. "That has been a topic of discussion among local attorneys for years." "Why is that?" I asked. "Your grandfather was known for refusing to join any community associations or sell any portion of his land," Sarah explained. "It caused quite a stir when the Lakeside Community Association formed. Most people assumed he eventually relented. When exactly was this association formed? My grandfather never mentioned it. Sarah thought for a moment. About 15 years ago, I believe. It was around the time property values in the area began to rise significantly. 15 years ago. The timing struck me immediately. That would have been around 2010, when my grandfather's health had begun to decline after his stroke. He had remained at the cabin, but his mobility and sometimes his clarity had been compromised. I hired Sarah on the spot. Her eyes widened as I explained the situation, the violation notices, the claims about property boundaries, and the eviction threat. "This warrants investigation," she said firmly. "The association may be operating under assumptions about property rights that are not legally sound." Over the next week, Sarah and I dug deeper. We discovered that the Lakeside Community Association had indeed been formed 15 years ago, initially with just 12 lakefront properties. Conspicuously absent from the original documents was any signature from my grandfather. "Your grandfather would have had to explicitly transfer certain property rights to the association," Sarah explained as we reviewed documents in her office. "Without his signature on these covenants, it is difficult to see how they could claim authority over his property." The real breakthrough came when I returned to the cabin and decided to check every inch of the place. My grandfather had always been methodical and cautious. If he had important documents, he would have secured them somewhere safe. In the small bedroom that had been his, I noticed that one floorboard beneath the area rug did not quite match the others. It took some effort, but I managed to pry it up, revealing a small metal safe embedded in the floor. The combination, I tried his birthday, then mine, with no success. On a hunch, I tried the date the family had acquired the property, 7/18/18. The lock clicked open. Inside lay a treasure trove of documents, original property deeds, survey maps from the 1920s, 1950s, and 1990s, water rights documentation, and most importantly, my grandfather's personal journal with entries spanning decades. I spent the entire night reading through everything. The property deed described boundaries that encompassed not just the cabin and its immediate surroundings, but the entire northern shoreline of the lake, over 30 acres in total. Most shockingly, the water rights documentation confirmed what seemed impossible. My grandfather's property included the lake itself. In his journal, my grandfather had written about repeated attempts by developers to purchase portions of his land. June 12, 2008, another offer today, twice the amount of the last one. They want the shoreline for condominiums. Told them what I always tell them, not for sale at any price. This land stays in the family, undivided and undeveloped. And then a more disturbing entry from 2010 after his stroke. November 3, something strange is happening. New neighbors claiming there is an association I must join. Showed them the deed. Told them to stay off my property. My speech is slurred from the stroke, but my mind is clear. They will not take what belongs to my family through trickery. The final pieces fell into place when Sarah called the next morning with news from her research at the State Property Records Archive. "I found the original survey maps," she said, excitement in her voice. "According to these legal documents, your grandfather owned not just his cabin, but the entire northern portion of Lake Clearwater, including the shoreline, the water itself. And yes, the very dock that the association has been claiming as theirs. Unless your grandfather explicitly signed away these rights, which we have found no evidence of, you are the legal owner of significantly more property than the association acknowledges." I sat in stunned silence, staring at the map spread across my kitchen table. I did not just own a cabin on the lake. I owned the lake itself. The so-called community dock was built on my property. The association common areas were mine. And for years, it appeared that Karen Peterson and her association had been systematically encroaching on land they had no right to claim. Sarah Bennett's office became my second home over the next 2 weeks. The walls were soon covered with property maps, timelines of association actions, and documentation of every violation notice I had received. We were building a case, piece by methodical piece. The evidence suggests a deliberate pattern of encroachment, Sarah explained, pinning another document to her corkboard. The association began making small claims on the boundaries of your grandfather's property after his health declined, gradually expanding their reach when those claims went unchallenged. We operated in careful secrecy. Sarah had impressed upon me the importance of maintaining the element of surprise. If Karen Peterson gets wind of what we are discovering, she will have time to construct counterarguments or potentially destroy evidence, she warned. For now, I suggest you continue to act concerned but compliant. Request extensions on their deadlines. Ask for clarification on their demands. Keep them thinking you are just another homeowner they can intimidate. While Sarah handled the legal documentation, I began researching Karen Peterson and the other board members. Information was not difficult to find in the small community. Karen had moved to the lake area 16 years ago, just before the association formed. Prior to that, she had worked in real estate development in Minneapolis. The real revelation came when Sarah uncovered a connection between Karen and Lakeview Developments, LLC, a company specializing in luxury waterfront properties. Public records showed that Karen had served on their board of directors until moving to Lake Clearwater. Even more disturbing were the architectural plans we discovered through a Freedom of Information request to the County Planning Department. Lakeview Developments had submitted preliminary proposals for Clearwater Shores, a luxury condominium development spanning the entire northern shoreline of the lake. The very land they were claiming belonged to the association. My land. The timing suggests a coordinated effort, Sarah noted as we reviewed the documents. First establish an association to assert control over the properties, then gradually pressure the original owners to sell, and finally replace the cabins with high-end condominiums. While building our legal case, I maintained a careful facade in the community. I politely requested extensions on violation corrections, claiming financial hardship. I documented every interaction with association members. When Karen or her associates came to inspect the property, I recorded the conversations and took photographs of their trespassing. In the evenings, I began quietly connecting with other homeowners who had faced similar pressures. Mrs. Abernathy invited me for coffee and shared how her late husband had argued with the association about property lines just before his passing. Harold always said our lot extended all the way to the large pine at the shoreline, she explained. But the association survey showed our property ending 20 feet sooner. We could never afford to fight them legally. Tom Wilson introduced me to other old-timers who remembered the lake before the association. Over beers on his back porch, 3 elderly men shared stories of fishing from docks that had been torn down and replaced with association-approved structures. "Your grandfather was the only one who never gave an inch," said Frank Miller, who had owned his cabin for 50 years. They tried every trick in the book, but old Jenkins would run them off with a shotgun of rock salt. After his stroke, though, they started acting like they owned the place. My kitchen table became command central. Each night, I spread out the documents from the safe, correlating them with the legal research Sarah provided. I identified the original boundary markers from the old photographs and confirmed their coordinates on the survey maps. I traced the history of the lake's ownership through my family's documents. The more I discovered, the clearer it became. The Lakeside Community Association had been systematically appropriating my family's land through a combination of bureaucratic intimidation and exploitation of my grandfather's declining health. Sarah and I developed a comprehensive legal strategy. First, we would challenge the association's authority over my property by presenting the original deeds and water rights documentation. Second, we would file for injunctive relief to prevent any further harassment or attempted eviction. Finally, we would pursue damages for years of unauthorized use of my property and the emotional distress caused by their tactics. When do we make our move? I asked Sarah during our final planning session. She smiled, glancing at the notice for an emergency association meeting that had been delivered to my door that morning. The agenda listed final action on Jenkins' property violations as the main topic. They have called a special meeting to approve your eviction, she said. I think that provides the perfect stage for revealing the truth. Are you ready to show Corinne Peterson who really owns Lake Clearwater? I thought of my grandfather's journal entries, his determination to preserve our family legacy against corporate greed. The documentation was organized, the legal arguments prepared, and the boundary evidence irrefutable. Now it was time to reclaim what was rightfully mine. More than ready, I replied, closing the folder containing a century of property rights that no one could legally take from me. Let them think they are coming to evict me. They have no idea what is actually going to happen. The community center parking lot was full when I arrived for the emergency meeting. Rain pounded against the windshield as I sat gathering my courage, the leather portfolio containing the key documents resting on the passenger seat beside me. Sarah pulled up next to me, giving a reassuring nod through her car window. Remember, she had coached earlier, let them go through their entire presentation. Do not interrupt. The more they reveal about their intentions on record in front of witnesses, the stronger our position becomes. Inside, the room was arranged like a courtroom. A long table at the front held Corinne and the 4 other board members. Rows of chairs faced them, nearly all occupied by lakeside residents. A projector displayed the association logo on the wall behind them. I took a seat in the back row. Several neighbors nodded in my direction, their expressions sympathetic. Others pointedly looked away. Mrs. Abernathy patted my hand silently as Sarah slipped into the seat beside me. Corinne called the meeting to order precisely at 7:00 p.m. She stood at the podium, immaculate despite the stormy weather, her voice carrying clearly through the room. Thank you all for coming on such a wet evening, she began. As you know, we have called this emergency session to address the ongoing situation with the Jenkins property. For those who may not be aware, we have been patient and generous in our attempts to bring this property into compliance with our community standards. The projector image changed to a photograph of my cabin. Red circles highlighted each alleged violation: the non-regulation dock, the unapproved exterior color, the non-compliant landscaping. Corinne methodically listed each infraction, her tone suggesting she was discussing a public health hazard rather than a family cabin that had stood for generations. Despite multiple notices and opportunities for correction, Mr. Jenkins has demonstrated a willful disregard for our community standards that we simply cannot allow to continue, Corinne continued. His refusal to acknowledge the association's authority undermines the very foundation of our community. The board treasurer, a thin man named Richard, took over to discuss the financial aspects. Mr. Jenkins currently owes $17,842 in fines, penalties, and back dues. No payments have been received despite multiple invoices. Next came a slideshow of compliant properties around the lake, all featuring nearly identical gray-blue exteriors, uniform docks, and the same manicured landscaping. The message was clear. Conformity was the only acceptable option. And now, Karen said, returning to the podium, we must take the regrettable but necessary step of proceeding with eviction. Our bylaws are clear. The board has unanimously approved this action. A timeline appeared on the screen, showing the 30-day eviction process. Several gasps came from the audience when they saw how quickly the association intended to take possession of the property. If Mr. Jenkins is present, Karen continued, scanning the room until her eyes found me. He now has 5 minutes to address the board before we finalize this decision. The room fell silent as I stood. Sarah handed me the portfolio as I walked slowly to the front. My heart hammered in my chest, but I kept my expression neutral. Years of my grandfather's stolen legacy were about to be reclaimed. I placed my documents on the podium, taking a moment to look each board member in the eye before speaking. Thank you for the opportunity to address the board, I began, my voice steadier than I expected. I have listened carefully to the allegations against my property and the claims regarding the association's authority over it. I removed the first document from my portfolio, a certified copy of the original 1918 property deed. Before responding to the specific violations, I believe it would be helpful to clarify exactly what property we are discussing. This is the original deed to the Jenkins property at Lake Clearwater, purchased by my great-grandfather in 1918. I placed it under the document camera, replacing the association slideshow with the century-old legal document. Murmurs spread through the audience as the property description appeared, clearly outlining boundaries far beyond what the association recognized. As you can see, the original property encompasses approximately 32 acres, including the entire northern shoreline of Lake Clearwater. I continued, my confidence growing. Now, let me show you the certified survey from 1992, which confirms these same boundaries. I displayed document after document, methodically building the case. The water rights certificate, the property tax records showing payments on the full acreage, my grandfather's journal entries documenting his refusal to join any association. And most significantly, I said, placing the final document under the camera, this is the title transfer registered with the county 3 weeks ago, conveying all rights, interests, and titles of this property from my grandfather to me. You will note that it matches exactly the boundaries established in 1918. Karen's face had transformed from smug confidence to confusion, and now to something approaching horror. The board members whispered urgently among themselves. Mr. Jenkins, Karen interrupted, her voice higher than before. These documents are interesting historical artifacts, but they do not override the association agreements that govern our community today. That is an interesting perspective, I replied, nodding to Sarah, who now stood and walked forward. Allow me to introduce Sarah Bennett, my attorney. She has some thoughts on whether your association agreements apply to my property. Sarah stepped to the podium with professional calm. After extensive research into county and state records, we have found no evidence that Mr. Jenkins' grandfather ever signed any association covenants, transferred any property rights, or in any way consented to association governance of his land. She placed a map on the document camera showing the actual association properties highlighted in yellow, a much smaller area than what they had been claiming. Furthermore, Sarah continued, we have documented evidence that the association has been systematically encroaching on the Jenkins property, particularly after Mr. Jenkins SR suffered a stroke in 2010. This includes the construction of what you call the community dock on land that has been in the Jenkins family for over a century. The room erupted in confused conversations. Corinne repeatedly banged her gavel, trying to restore order. When the noise finally subsided, her composure had cracked visibly. "These claims are outrageous and will need to be verified," she sputtered. I leaned into the microphone for my final statement. "They have been verified by the county assessor's office, the State Property Records Division, and by 3 independent surveyors. Not only is this cabin rightfully mine, but according to every legal document available, I own the entire northern shoreline, the boat dock you have been charging people to use, and the lake itself." I pointed to the rear of the room where 2 uniformed county officials had quietly entered. "Representatives from the county recorder's office are here with the official property maps. I believe you will find that not only can you not evict me from my property, but your association has been trespassing on my land for 15 years. Camera phones captured the moment as Corinne's face transformed from dismissive annoyance to horrified realization. Years of careful planning and systematic land appropriation were crumbling before her eyes. The word dynamic in the room had shifted completely, and every person present knew it. The community center emptied in chaos that night. Corinne abruptly adjourned the meeting, refusing to take questions as she and the board members hurried out a side door. The residents, however, remained in clusters throughout the parking lot despite the rain, processing the revelations they had just witnessed. By morning, the news had spread throughout Lake Clearwater. My phone began ringing early. Some calls came from neighbors expressing support and sharing their own stories of association bullying. Others were from local media requesting interviews about the Lake Clearwater HOA scandal, as it was already being called. Sarah advised me to make no public statements yet. "Let the documentation speak for itself," she counseled. "The county officials will be completing their boundary verification today. Once we have their official report, we can proceed with formal actions." Corinne launched an immediate counteroffensive. By noon, every homeowner had received an emergency association newsletter claiming my documents were potentially fraudulent and under investigation. The letter assured members that the association's legal team was confident in our position and urged everyone to remain calm and united against this attack on our community values. I watched from my cabin porch as a parade of cars slowly drove past, occupants staring curiously at the property that had suddenly become the center of the lake's biggest controversy in decades. Some drivers waved supportly. Others glared with open hostility. The community quickly divided into factions. Corinne's closest allies, primarily newer residents in the larger homes, rallied behind her claims. But many longtime residents began to question everything about the association they had reluctantly joined. 3 days after the meeting, I received an unexpected visitor. Walter Green, the association secretary, approached my cabin looking nervous and apologetic. "I wanted to speak with you privately," he said when I invited him in. "I had no idea about any of this. Corinne always handled the legal aspects of the association. We just trusted her." Walter explained how he had joined the board 5 years ago, primarily to have a say in fishing regulations. She would present documents for signature, and we would sign them. The boundary issues, the enforcement priorities, she controlled all of that. Did you never question why certain properties were targeted more aggressively than others? I asked. Walter looked down, ashamed. She always had convincing explanations. The lakefront properties were more visible, she said. They set the standard for the community. We needed to be particularly diligent about enforcing standards there. His revelation confirmed what Sarah and I had suspected. Karen had been the driving force, manipulating the board to achieve her objectives. Walter promised to provide copies of all board meeting minutes and internal communications, material that would prove invaluable in the coming legal proceedings. As word spread, other residents began sharing their stories. Mrs. Abernathy organized an informal gathering at her home, where elderly neighbors spoke of gradual encroachment on their lake access over the years. They described how the community areas had once been open shoreline that everyone used freely, until the association began installing fences and members-only signs. County officials spent a week verifying the property boundaries, placing temporary markers at the true corner points of my property. Neighbors watched in astonishment as these markers appeared hundreds of yards beyond what the association had claimed were my boundaries. 10 days after the meeting, representatives from Lakeview Developments arrived at my door. The two men in expensive suits introduced themselves as executives interested in resolving any misunderstandings about future development opportunities. There is no misunderstanding, I told them firmly. The architectural plans you filed with the county planning department for condominium development on the North Shore cannot proceed, because that land belongs to me, not to the association you have been working with. Their uncomfortable glances at each other confirmed another piece of the puzzle. Karen's connection to the development company had been more than coincidental. They left with reassurances that they wanted to maintain good relations with all property owners and would reconsider their options. Anonymous notes began appearing in my mailbox. Some contained threats, "You will regret this," and "Nobody likes a troublemaker." But more were messages of support and gratitude from residents who had felt powerless against the association for years. The community remained in limbo, uncertain about what would happen next. Association activities ground to a halt. The scheduled lake cleanup day was canceled. The annual fishing tournament was postponed indefinitely. Karen made one final attempt to maintain control, calling for another emergency meeting to address the Jenkins property dispute and legal options for preserving our community. Few residents attended. Those who did reported that Karen's normally commanding presence had diminished, her arguments sounding hollow as she insisted that technical legal issues with property descriptions would not undermine the association's authority. Meanwhile, Sarah worked diligently preparing our legal response. "We have 3 separate actions in progress," she explained during our strategy session. "First, an injunction against any further association claims on your property. Second, a cease and desist order regarding all fines and enforcement actions. And third, a claim for damages resulting from years of unauthorized use of your land and emotional distress." The community held its collective breath. Decades of assumptions about property ownership had been built on deliberate misrepresentations. The reckoning had begun, but the full resolution remained uncertain as neighbors wondered what would become of their beloved lake community once the dust settled.